And we're recording.
Okay. So this is the cover of my book, Final Flight, Final Fight, My Grandmother, the WASP, and Arlington National Cemetery. And this is the kind of what I started talking about once. I used to give talks before the book, and so once the book came out, this became the cover of it. It kind of goes through some of the same things that are in the book, but I talk a little more in detail when I do the, lecture. So this is Fifi Nella. She was designed by Walt Disney as part of the Gremlins series. Back in the day, the Gremlins were part of Roald Dahl's story about kind of like little creatures that get into airplanes and can cause trouble and stuff. Anyway, she's like the lady gremlin. So she was licensed to the WASP to be their mascot, and you will see her on their patches and some of their airplanes and things. You can see it on my grandma's jacket. These are some of the women Air Force service pilots. None of these women is my grandma, before anyone asks. No. But this is like a really famous picture of them, so a lot of people know this one. So it's like, what did the WASP do? The WASP actually was the product of two different programs that merged together in August of 1943. So originally Jackie Cochran and Nancy Love kind of had simultaneous ideas to use women as pilots during World War II. So Nancy Love became in charge of the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, which took women who already were working as pilots, ferrying planes, etc., to come in and ferry Army planes. And then Jackie became in charge of the Women's Flying Training Detachment, which was training women who had a pilot's license but weren't necessarily working as pilots or anything already. I mean, some had more experience than others, but like my grandmother only had a pilot's license. That was it. She hadn't really done any flying as a job or anything when she ended up doing it. So they merged together in August of 1943 and became the WASP, which stands for Women's Air Force Service Pilots. And Air Force is one word. People get that wrong a lot, and it's kind of awkward because I don't know if it really should be one word, but anyway. More than 25,000 women applied for the program. 1,830 were accepted. 1,074 graduated from the program, and then there were 28 from the ferrying squadron, so a total of 1,102. 13 came from the state of Maryland, including my grandmother. This is a picture of them in Avenger Field in Sweetwater. Originally, the program was located in Houston, Texas, but after a while, they figured out that Houston was not the most conducive place to training for flying. I guess it's quite foggy there and whatever, so they couldn't fly a lot. So they decided to move it to Avenger Field in Sweetwater, which is in Western Texas. It's dry. It's very windy, but I guess it's dry. It's better for training, whatever. I'm not a pilot, so some of this stuff is like, you guys are pilots. You understand this more than I do. This is Hap Arnold and Jackie Cochran. Hap Arnold was a general at the time who was actually supportive of this program. And obviously, they needed the Army's blessing to bring these women in and fly the Army airplanes. And they were brought in under civilian status, but they had the understanding, at least to my grandma and some other women who talk about it, that they were joining the Army. But there had to be a law passed through Congress to officially allow the Army to commission them. And while that was ongoing, they said, well, let's just start the program and we'll figure out later, like there's a war happening. We don't have time to wait around for Congress, so we just do it. And of course, my grandma, at the time, everyone was looking to participate and support somehow. So they went and did it and didn't really ask a lot of questions. So these are some of the tasks the WASP did. They flew military cargo around the country. They transported new planes to different bases. They tested new planes. They towed targets behind planes for men to practice shooting at before they went overseas. And they trained male pilots going overseas. My grandmother's job, she flew a BT-13 airplane in Nellis Air Base, which is now Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada. And if you know the BT-13, it's a two-seater and there's one behind the other. So she would sit in the front, the man would sit in the back, and they had the canvas in the cockpit to block out the light, and then would just do instrument training. My grandma said her job was to make sure the men didn't fly into Mount Charleston. So here's a picture of towing targets. the men would, I mean men, these were probably guys that were like 17 years old learning to shoot artillery at these planes before they got sent overseas. But you can see the target behind that plane. These are some of the well-known WASP: Elizabeth Gardner, Ruth Helm. I think at least Ruth Helm lived in Arizona for a long time. This is Hazel Ying Lee. She was one of 2 Chinese American WASP. She died in a plane crash in November of 1944. She's one of the 38 WASP who died in service. I think she was either the last or the second last WASP to die. And ironically, or sadly, tragically, her brother died in Europe 2 days before that. He was in the army. And also, ironically, her family got into an argument with their cemetery. They were from Oregon. The cemetery didn't want someone Chinese buried in the cemetery, so they had a fight with their cemetery, which I think resolved successfully. This is my grandmother. So some basics about Elaine Harmon. She was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1919. She attended college at the University of Maryland in College Park. If you've been out here, you know that there is an airport at the College Park area. It is the oldest continuously operating airfield in the United States, possibly the world. I think there might be one in France that's like one day more. I think it might be the world though. Like 1909, something like that. Her uniform and gold medal are on display at the museum. And my grandma entered the WASP program in March of 1944. And like I said, after she finished training, she was stationed at Nellis Air Base in Las Vegas. This is a picture of her Civil Aeronautics Administration, which I believe was the forerunner of the FAA, her license to fly. And that was issued in 1940. This is a picture of her in her uniform. She was in class 44-9. The 44 denotes the year of the class. W means women, and 9 meant it was the 9th class of the year. She was in the second to last class of the program. The program ended at the end of 1944. This is a picture of her with her PT-17 in training. We don't have very many pictures of her during her WASP time. I don't think she had a camera. Some of the WASP have scrapbooks and have a lot of pictures. So a few of the ones that were in her class, she's in their pictures, but we only have a few pictures of her. So the WASP flew more than 60 million miles, tested planes, towed targets, trained other pilots, delivered more than 12,000 new or repaired aircraft, freed up pilots to go overseas during war, and were the first women to fly military planes in the United States. Their main goal of this program was to provide more pilots to go overseas and fly combat missions, because as I'm sure you're aware, during World War II, there was a high mortality rate for pilots and air crew overseas. So they felt like they were going to need to continuously replace them. So that was kind of the point of this program. So at the end of 1944, the WASP were told to go home and they were not needed any longer. They didn't become part of the military as they were supposed to. The bill that I mentioned in Congress failed by 19 votes in the summer of 1944. My grandmother went home. She was already married when she joined the program. My grandfather was overseas. He was not in the service. He was 4F, which meant he had a physical ailment that prevented him from serving. He worked in Asia for an aircraft company, and he was overseas while she was working in the WASP program. After she was at Nellis, she came home. She was really bored in Baltimore, and then she went back to California and worked at Oakland Airport for about a year as an air traffic controller until my grandfather came home. And then they moved back to Maryland, and that's when they had 4 kids and things went ahead. So in the 1970s, like I mentioned, the bill never got passed during 1944 to formally admit them into the Army. So in the 1970s, the services were required to start integrating women into their programs, like the service academies, Air Force Academy, etc. And the services also started having women in their pilot training programs. And some of the publicity or information about that said that these would be the first women to fly military planes. And of course, my grandmother and her WASP friends were like, we did this like 30 years ago, maybe we should go tell people. So they went to Congress and lobbied to get a bill passed to retroactively recognize them for their service as veterans. It took several iterations and went through multiple sessions of Congress until it became part of the GI Reauthorization Bill Act in 1977 that was signed by President Carter and assisted into legislation by Senator Barry Goldwater, who actually during the war had known some of the WASP and worked with them, I guess. So he was very supportive. But the law actually didn't grant them veterans benefits. What it did was grant the WASP and any other group who felt that they should have been recognized as veterans the right to petition the Department of Defense for that recognition. So after this law got passed through Congress, then they had to go petition DOD for this recognition, which took another 2 years. So my grandmother did not get a DD-214, which is the paperwork you receive when you separate from active service, showing that you've served, until 1979, which was 35 years after she finished her service. So when people talk about the military is really slow, the government's really slow, I say, yeah, my grandma had to wait 35 years for her DD-214. So there you go. In the 1970s, oh, this is what I just explained. Oh, we can skip this one, good. Okay, so this is the law that was passed that became public law 95-202. You don't have to read this text, but it basically explains what I said. They can go to DOD and get recognition. This is my grandmother's DD-214. You will see there's an asterisk there in her remarks section that says the period of service is considered active military service for laws administered by the Veterans Administration, which is the forerunner of today's Department of Veterans Affairs. So that little tidbit of information can just go in your mind for a moment while we move forward. So here I come along in 1976, and I had this shirt which said Gammy flew planes in World War II. So I think I've been advocating for her for a long time. I just didn't know about it. And I always knew what she did. She talked about it, but it wasn't a secret, but she didn't make a huge deal out of it. Although she did do things like, you know, go to the White House for breakfast. She met 5 presidents. She was invited to the White House multiple times, a lot of Air Force events around Washington, the opening of the Air Force Memorial, the one next to Arlington Cemetery. I went with her to the opening of the National World War II Memorial on the National Mall with President Bush Jr. and Sr. and Clinton was there, I think. I think there were like 3 or 4 presidents there. We sat in the VIP section with a bunch of World War II people, so it was really cool that she was sitting with all the veterans. This is my grandma with Lorraine Rogers in this one picture, who lived in Alexandria, and she went to some of these events with my grandma. And then on the right is Lorraine and my grandma with Toby Felker, who's also laid to rest at Arlington Cemetery. All 3 of them are at Arlington Cemetery now. In 2002, another WASP named Irene Englund passed away, and her daughter was trying to request to have military honors at her funeral at Arlington. Her husband was already buried there, so eligibility was not the issue. It was that she wanted a standard military honors at her funeral, and they said no. So she went and kind of did what I did, like started this campaign in the media. She had some articles in the Washington Post and things, and she used to work at Harvard Law School, so I think she had a lot of friends with good, you know, influence. And eventually the Army issued a statement that the WASP were allowed to be in Arlington Cemetery inurned on their own, and that was not in question. So eventually they relented and had a funeral for her, standard military honors for her. This is Toby Felker, who I mentioned earlier. She's laid to rest on her own, inurned at Arlington Cemetery in 2006. My grandmother went to a lot of these funerals, so I think that's part of the reason she wanted to be there. In 2009, Colonel Nicole Malachowski, who you may know as the first female Thunderbird pilot, she is in this picture on the right. wrote legislation to award the WASP the Congressional Gold Medal. And she went to Congress, kind of like I did, and walked around and lobbied people, went to Senator Hutchinson for Texas, met with Senator Reed, who was the majority leader at the time, to support this bill, met with a bunch of offices and got them to support this bill. Eventually was signed. My grandmother was invited to the Oval Office to witness the signing of this bill. So here she is with B. Haydu, who's on the left, and Lorraine Rogers, who I mentioned earlier, is in between President Obama and Representative Ileana Ros-Lehtinen in the kind of light jacket. She was a representative from Florida who is the lead sponsor on the House side of that bill. Senator Mikulski attended the gold medal ceremony, which happened in March of the following year at the US Capitol. This picture I always put in, and people think it's funny, but Applebee's has this thing on Veterans Day. They give free meals to veterans. So my grandma always wanted to go to Applebee's on Veterans Day and get her free veterans meal. So here's a picture of me and my grandma at Applebee's on Veterans Day getting her veterans meal. And I always point it out because Applebee's never questioned whether she was a veteran or not. And my grandmother went and did talks just like this to schools and air shows and all that sort of thing after the 1970s issue with Congress. They all realized, I guess we should go out and talk about this, because we hadn't done it for 30 years and nobody knows who we are. So she started going to air shows and things. You will recognize probably Sean Tucker and his son there. I think that's at Oshkosh. And then the one on the bottom is at the Reading Air Show in Pennsylvania, which was her favorite air show because it's all World War II related. And in the bottom picture is Shucy Reynolds on the right and B. Haydu on the left. And there's my grandma. This is, there's a guy in Maryland who has one of these Stearmans. He likes to give rides, and he gave my grandma a ride in it. It was her favorite plane. She also visited with Fifi. And this is my grandma. I think she's like around 89 years old in this picture. She did these talks until she was physically no longer able to do them. So my grandmother passed away in April of 2015. And if you recall the little asterisk from earlier, Arlington is run by the Department of the Army. The rest of the National Military Cemeteries, about 140, are run by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Arlington Cemetery told my mom after she sent the paperwork in that my grandma could only be laid to rest at a cemetery run by the Veterans Affairs Department because of this sentence that's in her DD 214. So around Veterans Day in 2015, I posted this on Instagram and Facebook or something, and all these people started writing, people I didn't even know, and it kind of went viral. And I was like, well, if all these people are think this is wrong and supporting us, maybe I can do something. So I started this publicity campaign with the goal initially to just make the Army look bad and that they would change their mind. But as I went along, I realized that we really needed to change the law because the Army could just change their mind again. Because basically this rule was in place, as I mentioned earlier. In 2002, they issued a statement that WASP were allowed to be inurned at the columbarium in Arlington Cemetery, which is what we wanted. But 1 month before my grandma died, they did a review of the regulations and decided WASP were not actually allowed to be at Arlington on their own. So that is where this came about. So we started this campaign. We had a petition on change.org. I did lots of media interviews. I went to Congress. I met with more than 150 offices on Capitol Hill between the Senate and House side. I wrote op-eds, blog posts. I mean, this was like constant thing for several months. This is our petition. We had more than 178,000 signatures. It's one of the top petitions they've ever had on this website. This is an article in the New York Times. And a lot of organizations were supporting us, which was nice. I didn't even know these people when I started this. And now I know a lot of them, which is pretty cool. They were emailing their members, telling them to, call their Congress people, support the issue, sign our petition. So that was really nice. And now I've met a lot of them, which is a, cool thing. So conveniently in Congress at the time, one of the members was Martha McSally, who spent 26 years in the Air Force and was an A-10 pilot, graduate of the Air Force Academy. And she happened to run for Congress, and it was her first freshman term, and she happened to be there and found out about this issue and said she would support it and write legislation to help us. This is her in Arizona with a couple of the WASP, 3 of the WASP. So she was from Arizona, the 2nd district, which is down in Tucson area. The bill was HR 4336. This is the title. This is one of the TV shows she was on to support the bill. This is the first day we met her when she said she would introduce the bill. I was like, well, we're coming down to Capitol Hill because we're coming down to Arlington for an interview. Should we just come visit? And so her staff said, yeah, come by. So we went by and met them, and it was really nice. So this was the day the bill was introduced in Congress. Then they had a special session, which means they spent an hour just talking only about this, which was really cool to have Congress talking about your grandma for an hour, and all these people came down to give statements. It was very cool. On the Senate side, we had a bill, a companion bill, sponsored by Senator Mikulski, who you saw earlier from Maryland, and Senator Ernst from Iowa. At the time, there were only 4 women in Congress who were veterans: Martha, Senator Ernst, Tammy Duckworth, and Tulsi Gabbard. These are some pictures of me going to the Hill talking. This is Representative Boss from Illinois. He was in the Marine Corps. Kathleen Rice from New York, who knows some of the WASP. She's at the Air Museum up there a lot. Rose Leighton from Florida, who I mentioned earlier, who helped with the Congressional Gold Medal bill. Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, also very helpful. She did a couple interviews with one of the WASP, Elizabeth Strophus, who was from Minnesota. So she already knew about the WASP, which was cool. And unfortunately, Miss Strophus died during the process of this, which was really sad. We had a press conference in front of the United States Capitol to support the bill, and a ton of senators and members came, and it was really cool, and members of the press. So the bill passed unanimously through the House in March 22nd, 2016, and it was very nice. Representative McSally invited me to come down to the floor of the House of Representatives and watch them vote on the bill, which was very cool, once in a lifetime opportunity. Went over to the Senate. They changed 2 things, so it had to get passed by the House again. And then it was signed by President Obama on May 20th, 2016. So this is in March when the bill got passed through the House. So what else do you do when a bill gets passed? You get a tattoo. So I have this tattoo. This is the bill. Once it got signed into law, this is the actual law, Public Law 114-158. If you want to know something, the 114 is the session of Congress that it passed during. So if you recall earlier, the public law was 95-202. So that was during the 95th Congress. And this is during the 114th Congress. This is the portion of the US Code where the law comes in, and the code in Title 38. So I actually work at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I have this book on my desk. This is what I use for work. So it's pretty cool to have this law in the book that I use every day. So we were finally able to have a funeral in September of 2016, which is about 4 months after the law got signed and about almost 18 months after my grandma died. So it was pretty cool. We had some women in our honor guard, a female chaplain, so that was good representation. So we have the service over near the graves, and then this wooden urn here was donated by a gentleman named John Sword from Idaho, who does woodworking, and he offered to donate this to us, and it was engraved with her information and a set of WASP wings. Then we walked over to the site where they put the urn in the wall. And this is in the area where the urns, if you guys haven't been to Arlington before, this is where the cremated ashes are laid to rest. And we had some nice people from the Warburg community offer to do a flyover. So we had T6 and P51s do a flyover during the service, which was very cool. This is some of the pilots you might know. This is Scott Yoke, he flies Quicksilver. And on the bottom is Rob. And at the time he owned this with some other people, this T6, which now is in the commemorative Air Force, which actually was then, I think, taken by the commemorative Air Force, and then they eventually, it might be going to the WASP Museum. Anyway, it's part of the commemorative Air Force plan, the WASP Rise Above program, if you've seen that around at the air shows. This is one of the coolest pictures ever. This is from the T6s when they're flying over the Pentagon coming to Arlington. Arlington's just next to the Pentagon, if you don't know where this is laid out. So I love this picture. And then after the service, we had a memorial service at the Military Women's Memorial next door, which my grandmother was also friendly with General Vaught, who was kind of the instrumental person in getting the Women's Military Memorial created. So my grandma was into that as well. So we had 3 WASP attend the service, and then Representative McSally was there as well to speak. So this is some of the people at the service, my family. We had some WASP, obviously at the time, you know, they're older, they can't travel. So I asked some of them if they wanted to send thoughts. And so I had a friend of mine who is a pilot read their thoughts at the service. So Jean Harmon is actually still alive. She lives in California. There's only about 13 or so WASPs still alive. So now I go to these events and air shows like my grandma used to do and give talks and things, which is not what I envisioned as a child happening, but things happen and I'm happy to do it. And I appreciate that people want to hear it and listen to it. This is at the Texas WASP Museum event that they have every year, which I'm actually going next week. And it used to be like a homecoming. The WASP would come down and they would have a big celebration. Obviously now a lot of them, there aren't that many, they can't travel, whatever. So we're trying to transition to having a celebration of their lives and also honoring current women pilots and the women pilots that came after them. So if you haven't been, you can come visit. It's in Sweetwater, right where they used to train. So this year when I went, I think we had 12 or 13 of them visit with us. And this is at Oshkosh. And I just like to talk about how it's nice that, you know, people appreciate, like, want to listen to me talk about this, because I'm not my grandma and they're not around anymore really to give talks. So I appreciate that people want to hear about this and keep their history alive. If you're ever in Arlington Cemetery, you can go visit my grandmother's grave. It is in the columbarium section, court number 9. And that's the end of that.
Well, I will open it up to questions. If anybody has questions, comments. I know I have a few of my own, but I will open the floor to everyone else first.
And we can talk about not just that, like book writing, whatever, anything you want.
Go ahead, Anne. You're muted though, so just make sure to unmute yourself.
Well, you're quite an advocate. I'm wondering when you're going to go into politics for real. This was for real, for sure, but you did a great job. You did everything you were supposed to do.
Thank you.
Grandma must have been very proud knowing you were doing that.
I hope so.
Well,
my grandma hated politics and lawyers, and I'm a lawyer, so I don't know about all that, but
well,
yeah, I think definitely would have been ironic for her. Ironically, like the most important thing, which I say in the book too, is what she really wanted all of this time since the 70s was just for people to know what they did and that they existed. And that was about it. and not to forget about them.
Mhm.
And ironically, because we got in a fight with Arlington Cemetery, millions of people learned who they were. So she kind of achieved her dream through that argument.
Well, I really enjoyed your presentation a lot.
Well, thank you.
So Erin, you also recently wrote a children's book, right?
I did. It is called What Grandma Did. It was illustrated by my cousin, who actually lives out there in New Mexico. So,
Where in New
yeah.
Mexico?
She lives in Santa Fe, well, near Santa Fe. What's the name of her town? I forget the name of her town, but she lives in the mountains near Santa Fe.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I think this is my favorite illustration. She illustrated everything. She did all these paintings by hand, and then we scanned them into the scanner to digitize them. But it's basically the same story, but for little kids. So it's pretty cool because my niece, my sister who lives in Texas, has 3 kids, and she sent me a video recently of my niece who's 6 reading it out loud. And then in the middle of the book, she goes, "Wait, is this about our family?" And then she says, "Wait, is this my grandma?" Because I have a couple of like real photographs in here. And she was like, "Wait, is this my grandma?" And my sister was like, "Well, it's my grandma. She's your great grandma." It was pretty cute.
It's not every day you get to read a children's book about your own great grandma.
Yeah. The funny thing too, the kid across the street was the first kid to get a copy like before it came out. Because I was like, well, he's like 4, like maybe they can read it to him and see what he thinks. And so my picture's on the back, right? Apparently he calls it Erin's book, and he's just really excited that he thinks like I'm famous and I'm on the back of a book. It's really cute.
Well, I mean, you kind of are. I mean, how many people know that many senators and congressmen and, WASP pilots? And I mean, kind of famous.
I don't know about that, but I appreciate that people, like I said, want to hear about things and want to listen. It's nice. And care about it. And like I said, when I had to go to Texas to talk to the State Board of Education, it's just an example of what happens when you don't talk about this stuff. Like, this was not in books growing up. It was not in encyclopedias. We didn't have Google. Like, nobody knew who these people were. And so, I've had history teachers tell me they didn't know about them, but since this happened, I've had people say like, "Oh, I added this in my curriculum," or "I teach my kids about it," which is cool.
Erin, do you know the connection between the 99s and WASPs?
In what sense?
Well, someone told me about a year ago, and I can't remember the actual connection, but the name the 99s is like a takeoff from the women air service pilots. So I was wondering if you might know.
My understanding is the 99s were created in like prior to the WASP, right?
I don't think so. But I don't know. Does anybody else know? Because the guy in my class last year actually told me the history of why they're called the 99s, and he said it has to do with the WASP.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah, I thought maybe somebody else might know.
I'm looking it up.
Oh yeah,
that's
established
a
in
Google for.
established in 1929 by 99 women pilots.
Mhm.
Right, and one was like a couple of them were super famous ones.
Well, one of the
yes.
founding members was Amelia Earhart.
Right.
Right. Jackie Cochran, Pancho Barnes.
So Jackie Cochran there, she was, like I said, basically the leader of the WASP. So she was, involved in the 99s.
Maybe that's the connection.
Yeah.
So they were formed before the WASPs.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great.
But I'm sure many of the WASP were 99s, when they joined, because they all had to be pilots to even apply already. So.
Okay.
And I know my grandma went to a lot of 99s events and things after, later. And she was in the Women Military Aviators. Right.
Wow.
Group.
Which has the best flight suit social at WAI every year. It's a lot of fun.
So I know Jacqueline is/was in the service, reserve, whatever. Was anyone else here in the service?
Dan, didn't you serve?
Yes, mostly sitting down.
Dan is very modest. He served, but so let's see. Alexis is a member of EAA and Young Eagles. She helps with them. She's our treasurer. Audine is our outreach chair, and she is an A&P mechanic as well as a pilot. And she's also recently a dispatcher. And then Jessie is our vice president, and she's the manager of Cutter Aviation at Albuquerque. And we've become friends. She doesn't live in New Mexico, but we've become friends because she also does advocacy for young girls and women in aviation, things like that. Anne, do you want to tell her a little bit more?
I'm sorry, I was writing a note.
I was just telling Erin a little bit about you. So if you want to talk about yourself for a second.
Oh, I'm not a pilot, but I have an aunt who was an aviatrix in the late 1920s. She won an all-girls contest to learn to fly when she was out of high school. And I grew up hearing wonderful stories about her from my dad, her brother, who was a little bit older than she was. And she was my childhood heroine, although I never met her because she had an accident. She flew both power and gliders. And she had an accident in a glider, got tangled up in some wires, fell out of the glider and picked herself up and went and gave a big speech that night to the FAA that was forming. And a few days later, she was in the hospital and never got out. She had internal injuries.
Wow.
Yeah, but I've carried her with me for decades. Actually, I'm writing about her, and I've created a girls project around her too that got abruptly halted because of COVID, because I was meeting with girls in my community in person. But I hope to get back to that in person with girls.
Oh, that's
this
cool.
Summer. Yeah. You know, I might have met your mom or at least heard her, your grandma, because I was at Women in Aviation conference in Dallas the last time they had it in Dallas, and they introduced several WASPs, and I was just so charmed by all of them. I was sitting in the front row, and most of them got up and spoke, you know, about their experiences, and I really enjoyed that. So she was probably there. Who knows? I don't remember the names now.
Yeah, she went to a lot of those things.
Yeah. So
it is cool. Like sometimes when I do talks and I meet people who knew her or met her, it's interesting.
Yeah. And that's the first time I'd heard about the WASPs, was at the Dallas WAI conference. I was impressed.
I was shocked because I went to the conference in Nashville, which is where I met Jacqueline, and I was doing my book selling at my table. And during that period, just an hour and a half, I met 3 people who had never heard of them. And I was like, what's happening? I was so confused because out in the world, I'm not surprised, but when I'm at a WAI conference, I was shocked that there were people who had never heard of them. That was very surprising to me.
You know, and I did watch the Obama had a presentation on television during a news conference, and I watched that because I had heard about them at WAI. Yeah, also very touching.
So Erin, I have just a little bit of a personal question for you. So in the book, you talk about how your mom's always like, so when's the Senate going to meet, Erin? Get the Senate to meet. It's so funny. I loved hearing just how real you were in the book about, you know, like the family and just kind of like the impatience of like, Erin, call the Senate, get them to meet and just pass this already. Did your mom, because it sounds like she just went where you told her to go and she talked when you asked her to talk. does she fully grasp how much work you put into that?
I
Because
don't
it
think
seems a lot like my mom. Like she's just kind of aloof. Like she understands, but she doesn't. You know what I mean? So does your mom like fully comprehend how much time and energy and effort you put in to this project?
I don't think that she did while it was happening, but once we were done, and then obviously when I wrote the book, she read the book, but when we were done and I was kind of putting everything together and people was, you know, at the funeral, I think a lot of my family understood that it was a really big deal and it was a lot of work, because I emailed my family beforehand, because I had family coming from, you know, California, whatever, to come to this funeral. And obviously they had been like following along, but I emailed everyone and I said, I want you all to be aware that this is a very high profile thing. A lot of well-known people are coming. There will be a lot of reporters. It's gonna feel like you're at the paparazzi or something, like just, and they were like, yeah, whatever. But then when they showed up and like got out of the cars and there were all these reporters there, they were like, and I was like, I told you guys it's a big deal. Like, I think they finally like understood what was going on and how much attention this had gotten and how much work it was. Like, you know, that was I think for them, because they weren't there in person, and my mom was with me, and I think I try to explain in the book, she's very introverted. She doesn't want to go out and do this kind of thing, and even though obviously she wants to support it and help and whatever, and I just, you know, kind of ran with it, and it just became easier for me to just like be in charge and just kind of have people doing things rather than trying to have all different people. It was just easier for one person to be in contact with everyone and then kind of delegate things. And, you know, so when I didn't have time to do, you know, interviews and things, and I asked her if she wanted to, she would do them. She didn't always want to do them. So I just kind of ran with it and kind of tried to play. My sister, one of my sisters did the petition, because I worked for the government and I didn't know if I was supposed to be making petitions against the government because I worked for them. So I told her to put her name on it. We were talking about it. I was like, why don't you just put your name on it and like you can be in charge of it, because I don't know if I'm supposed to be doing this.
Well, I also love your mother's love for FOIA requests.
Oh my gosh, she loves the FOIA request. She's hilarious. So my mom also used to work for the government. In fact, she was working for the government when this was happening as well. And yeah, she was very into like when we had to send this information. So when I first got denied on the phone, she asked me to help figure all this stuff out. She's like, I don't understand why they're saying this. I've been to the funerals at Arlington. There's WASP there. I don't get it. So I went online and did a bunch of research, and that's when I found this law and this little asterisk and this letter we got and whatever explaining everything. And I was like, well, they're not really wrong. I mean, I don't agree with them, but like technically they're not really wrong. And so she was like, well, what are we supposed to do? And I was like, you have to get a law passed in Congress. And she was like, what? Because she's the type that's like, I'm going to write a strongly worded letter. Like her favorite thing is to write emails to companies and airlines about their terrible service and how she had such a bad experience, and get her Southwest love voucher because her plane was delayed or whatever. She loves that. She loves a strongly worded letter. So when this first started, she's like, well, I'm going to write a letter to the Secretary of the Army. And I was like, okay, well, you do that. I'm going to go to Congress. And ironically, it almost took just as much time for this letter to get to the Secretary of the Army, because it has to go to this facility in New Jersey where they x-ray everything and like radiate it all and whatever. And then it gets sent. I mean, it's a whole situation. So she had sent it. I don't even know if I finished explaining this in the book, but she sent it like certified mail or something. So she was tracking it. And it took like 3 months for this letter to get there. Meanwhile, I was like, I got a whole bill in Congress going on, all this stuff. Like, it was very funny.
Well, and especially when she did get the official memo that explained why the decision had been changed, and the entire 3 pages was redacted. I laughed out loud.
The entire thing is redacted except for like the topic.
And there's nothing classified about that. Like no. Absolutely nothing.
No, there's nothing classified.
You hit the nail on the head in the book when you said it was only because it would embarrass them.
Yeah, basically. It was so random. I was like, my mom was like, so I got this letter. And I was like, okay. And she's like, And I'm like, it literally everything's blacked out. So I actually, the day we got it, I think I texted Senator Ernst's staff. And I was like, so we got that letter you guys have been looking for. Can I send it to you? And they're like, sure. And I was like, just beware, you might start laughing. And they're like, what? And so I sent it and they were like, oh my gosh.
So
Yeah.
I am super curious. I'll just tell everybody else. We have a mutual kind of friend or acquaintance, if you will. So part of the story is at the time the then Secretary of the Army, circulated out of the office, and so there was a interim Secretary of the Army who at the time was the Undersecretary of the Army, who is also a former senator, and his name is Patrick Murphy. Well, Patrick Murphy happened to be one of my college professors just a few months ago. So when I heard his name, I was like, wait, I know him. He seems like a really nice guy. And so I was like waiting with bated breath to hear how the correspondence with him went. And you were super suspicious of him at first.
I was because, okay, so the day we did that press conference, I was looking for this video and I can't find it. And I don't know if it's because Martha's not in office anymore and it was like on her video list. It's on C-SPAN, but it would take a minute for me to go find it. But anyway, there's Patrick was the acting Secretary of the Army. Martha was a representative. She was in a committee hearing regarding a bunch of stuff. And he was there for whatever reason. So one of the things she brought up was the WASP and this bill going through. And there's this video of her going on him for like 6 minutes where she's like, I don't understand. Can I just bring these people? Why is there an exception? Blah, 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 blah. And he's just like, ma'am, like, ma'am, I understand where you're coming from. I totally support this. It's just the rule. Like, I can't change it. I don't know what to tell you. And she's just like, I don't understand. Why can't the executive branch do anything? And like, he's just like, ma'am, I don't know. You're in Congress. You need to pass this bill. It was quite entertaining. Like, he's a nice guy, but he was kind of in this position of like, this is what the Army decided. This is the rule. And like, and at the same time, it's not that they couldn't change it, but at the same time, like I said, they could just change it back or whatever. But their argument was that the law did not provide an avenue for them to create this regulation.
Well,
So
I think
anyway.
as a congressman, he probably knew that the best way forward was legislation, because like you said, the Army can just change their mind again. Just, whoever's the next person in charge can just be like, nope, change it back,
Yeah, it was like an entertaining exchange. But yeah, anyway, he's a nice guy. And I met him not that long afterwards at this event, and I sent Jackie the picture. I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, there we are.
Yep. Well, so when I first learned of your connection with him, I reached out to you and was like, oh my gosh, I know Patrick Murphy too, because I wanted to get a read on you to see like if it was a good relationship. And you're like, yeah, we're great, and you sent me the picture. So I reached out to him and actually invited him to surprise you today. He wanted to, but he's on a flight right now. But the very first words in the response email was, oh my God, I love Erin. So just so you know, but I tried to get him to be a surprise guest. But he, like I said, he's on a plane, but he was like, if anything happens, if I'm delayed for any reason, I will absolutely hop on. So
no, he's very nice. Yeah, he actually, like I said, I work at VA now, and now he works at VA. He's on this like committee thing, and so it's kind of, I don't work for him, but he's like above me, ironically. Yeah, I don't know. In Washington, all these people kind of circulate around,
That's really
cool. He's very nice. He actually was going to come and be at my. He was going to come to my book launch. Then he couldn't come. Is it the book launch? Anyway, he was going to come to some other event, and then he couldn't come. Yeah, but yeah, and I've seen him since too at another event too. I've seen him. I run into him here and there. Yeah. And like I said, my friend did that leadership master's degree that you did, but like a year or two ago. Mm. And she also did the President Bush leadership fellowship, whatever it's called. I think she was doing it simultaneous to that. But yeah, Patrick was her teacher too. So she was like, wait, Patrick is yes, he comes up all the time. He's everywhere.
Yeah, he seemed like a really nice guy. I mean, I only did, Zoom classes with him, but All right. Well, looks like Jesse has to go. Thank you for joining us, Jesse. Do you have anything else for Erin before you go?
Just my apologies. I'm so sorry. It's fire
okay.
season and the fires, and we're getting hammered, and
Yeah.
I was more distracted than I wanted to be. So
Well, that's important. I mean, yeah.
all right, gotta go.
Bye.
So, see ya.
Well, does anybody else have questions for Erin? Because we are at 6:03, so I don't want to keep anybody too long, but any other lingering questions? All right, well, I just have one more thing, kind of two more, or Audine, did you go? I saw you unmute. You're muted. Can't hear you, Audine.
Sorry. Can you buy your book in any bookstore, what my grandma did in the other one?
Yes, they're both. You can get them on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com or whatever, or you can get the ISBN number, ask your local bookstore to order it for you, whatever you're into.
Great, okay.
So Audine, just so you know, I've been doing it on Audible because I'm, it's hard for me to sit
I have
down and read
Audible,
books.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and Erin actually read it herself. So it's really fantastic because
It was a lot of recording.
I bet. I can't imagine just sitting there for hours and hours and hours, but you did a really good job. And I'm like so close to the end. But well, and I just wanted to say something real quick. Audine, this is your last time with us. Is that correct?
It will be, yeah, for a while since I'm starting this new job.
Yeah. So Audine
and-
took a job in Alaska. So first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
We will miss you deeply, but I just wanted to kind of announce it to the room so we could all wish you a farewell. And I mean, I wish you the best, but I'm very selfishly sad to see you go. I love having you in the chapter. You've been a great outreach chair.
Well, thank you. I'm gonna do my best to try and stay involved, but I'm just so overwhelmed right now of just the logistics of packing and driving 3,575 miles up there with my little Subaru just to get up there.
Keep the ocean on your left, you'll be okay.
Keep the water on your left.
Oh, okay.
Well, if any car can make it, the Subaru can.
Well, that's what I'm hoping, I've got some new tires, so that's a good start, but I bought the milepost book, which is the Bible for driving north, and they say get yourself a full-size spare. So now that's my next thing I got to do. So anyways, yeah, I'm going to try and stay in touch with all of you guys as best I can.
Well, we will miss you certainly, Audine, and I wish you the safest travels and such a great experience with your new job. And we are always here. So, I mean, email, phone call, text, you know how and where to find me.
Absolutely. And I will be back. This is not a permanent move. So everybody thinks, oh no, you won't be back, but I will.
You better.
All right. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Of course. And since we're talking about WASP, I just want to mention to everybody on our website, I'm going to post for a May event. It's not going to be anything official. We're not going to organize anything officially, but I do want everybody to know about honoring the WASP for the month of May, just because it's during Memorial Day, that month. And it is a way that we can, just honor them, talk about them, keep their story alive. I'll be posting stuff both to Facebook. I'll send out some emails with some links and resources, but we do have, I want to say we have 4 WASP who are buried in New Mexico. 3 of them are in Santa Fe and 1 is in Albuquerque. So it doesn't have to be on Memorial Day, but it's just a great activity to, go out to the cemetery, visit their grave sites, and I'll post some other things that we can do to just kind of bring attention to their story and just keeping it alive and passing it on so that people know what they did. So just be keeping an eye out for that.
Thank you for bringing that up. I'm actually an ambassador for that program.
I know. I'm going to post your YouTube. I'm going to post your YouTube video to our Facebook page. So we're going to see more of you. So does anybody have any last minute things? Alexis, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I've been trying to tinker with my new phone and the microphone wouldn't let me talk. And so just a quick question for you, Erin. You had mentioned being in Oshkosh. Do you usually go for things like air venture, things like that, or does it have to be a very specific WASP or military that you actually go out and speak?
So I've been there, I think I've been 4 times. I didn't go last year because the 2021 and 2020, 16, 17, 18, 19, I was there.
Okay.
And the last 2 years I didn't go because of the pandemic. I'm planning on going this year. I don't know what is going to happen if I'm going to give a talk. The other 4 times I've given a lecture. I sold my book at the, the author corner, whatever they call it. And I've gone to, some of the events there and everything. So I don't know. We'll see this summer. They haven't really told me what they want to do yet. So.
I only ask because this is going to be my first time and I'm very excited to actually be able to participate in AirVenture. So I will hope there.
But I go to Women Venture. So Women in Aviation has a breakfast on Wednesday morning of Oshkosh, which is very cool. They usually have good speakers. I don't think the tickets are on sale yet, but keep an eye out because it sells out really fast. There's also, which is on sale, is $5 for Wednesday in the middle of the day. They have a talk at the theater in the woods at Oshkosh, and there's usually like a female speaker, pilot person, aviation person who does that, and it's really cool. It's only $5, and that's a good one. And then there's some new AirVenture Women in Aviation stuff this year that they're going to do. There's like a whole area just for women in aviation event AirVenture stuff, Women Venture. So that'll be cool. So all Wednesday is all women in aviation stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the heads up. That's what I was curious about.
Yeah.
And then if you don't mind, one more question. Can you tell me about how long it took you to actually write the book, being that it kind of, came from the heart and it wasn't something that you were just kind of creating? Was it a pretty quick process or was it something that was still pretty lengthy to actually write, get published, the whole bit?
So I wrote the book while I was doing all this stuff in Congress. People kept saying, oh, this would be a great book. You should write a book. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, I'm kind of busy. And I didn't really think about it. And then after the bill got signed and I only had to do my full-time job and not all this other stuff, I was like, oh, I guess I have all this free time now. I guess I could try to write a book. So I thought naively, like, I'll just write a book. How hard can it be? So that summer before the funeral, I wrote like the first draft. And then when the funeral happened, I finished it. And then I sent it to the person who edited it. And it was really terrible, but it was just like trying to get all my information out of my head. And it was just like this long, here's everything that happened. And here's all these people and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, terrible. And so we read it together. She read it. And then we talked for a long time, like 3 hours about like cutting stuff out, what to add, what to keep, blah, 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 blah. And so then I spent like another year after that thinking about how to put it together and the order of things. And, because you want to talk about the WASP and explain who they were, but I also need to talk about my grandma. I have to talk about how we got in this situation. So there's a lot to talk about. So it's like, how do you explain all of this stuff? Keep it interesting, not make people bored or overwhelmed with details and laws and regulations. Like, I'm a lawyer. I don't want to like be talking about all these bills and stuff too nerdy, So, and then you want to like present it like you're telling your friends, because there's a lot going on there. So I read like in between all of that, I read like 20 memoirs to try to get their style down, like how they're presenting their story, because memoirs, like they're stories of people's lives, right? Like, so it's like each person has their voice, showing their voice, and you're talking about real people. So I don't want anyone to be offended, I was definitely suspicious of Patrick at the time, but like, I didn't like dislike him or anything. He was just like, this guy was kind of like my obstacle, right? But no, he was very nice. So you're talking about real people. You want to present them well, right? Truthfully, so that was hard, especially family members, So I thought about that for like a year and went through all of that. Then my editor and I went through it again, like line by line, cutting things out, changing words, things like very specific things. And then, so the whole process took quite a while, like more like a year and a half at least.
That is impressive. Yeah. Very time consuming, I'm sure, but also just so, I'm sure it just warms your heart and makes you so happy that it's out there, it's done, and you can educate all of these people now.
Yeah, well, that's like one thing that I think about when I'm doing these talks and stuff is my grandma did this for so long, but she had to be in person talking to people, right? And a book, it's like, it's out there in the world, anyone can get it. People in Australia buy it, I mean, wherever. And so I don't have to go there for them to read the story. Like, here's the story, you can read it, I'll gladly come talk to you, but this way it can be available to loads of people, And so my grandma never wrote a book or anything. So I think that would have been helpful to have you know, like I said, so it's like the children's book too. It's like, how do you keep this information out there? Part of why I do this is for young people to learn about this, you know.
Absolutely. And I'm a big advocate as well. So thank you. I appreciate your presentation and your time with us. It's been fantastic.
Well, I appreciate you listening. And like I said, all these people who care to listen to this and learn about it and help share the story. It's nice. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ms. Erin, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure having you. I thoroughly enjoyed it, especially seeing the pictures and hearing you talk about it. Just kind of brought more life to the book. If you guys haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. It is, I mean, I've just been on the edge of my seat the whole time driving, because I usually listen to it while I drive, but I've loved every minute of it. And again, just thank you so much for being here, Erin.
I appreciate that. It's also nerve-wracking, Alexis, when you write a book, because you're like, I hope people like this, because not like you write it just for people to like it, but you know, you want to go through all this effort and everyone's like,
You've been successful.
I couldn't imagine. That's why I had to ask about it. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody. Well, let's wrap this up. Thank you again, Erin, and I will see you guys all probably in about another month.
Thanks for inviting me to your meeting. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thank you, Erin.
Bye.
Thanks,